there. Good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Connie. I'm Connie Foote with Foote Title Group. How are you guys doing today? I don't know about you, but I love this wonderful weather, but the pollen is just really tough right now. So if I have to clear my throat a couple of times, that's what's going on, and I apologize about that. So how'd you guys do? Did you have a great Easter weekend? I hope everything was wonderful for you. Nice celebration. The weather was beautiful here on the East Coast, and hopefully you guys had a great time. Thank you so much for your time and tuning in this morning. I really appreciate you checking in. Let me know if you're on with us this morning. Good morning, Stacy. How are you today? Hey there, Miss Kathy. How are you? So what we try to do is come to you at least 2 times a week and talk about things real estate related. I am not a real estate agent. I am a title company owner and have been for quite some time. And so I've had a lot of different experiences. And what I like to do is bring you information that, or maybe things that could catch your attention, maybe make you think about a question that you may have about a closing or about buying a piece of real estate. And maybe I don't know the answers to all of your questions, but we know a lot of different professionals that there are in the industry that can help you out. And sometimes I can answer some of the questions, sometimes we can direct you in the right direction. But what I like to do is to bring up topics to get your attention, to maybe bring up something that you thought of, but you didn't know how to ask, or maybe you hadn't thought of, and it was something that you really wanted to know the answer to. So this morning I wanted to talk to you about who actually has to attend that closing. And, you know, a lot of times you might be surprised at what you can and can't do and who needs to be there and how that has to work out. So good morning, Miss Tammy, and thank you so much for letting us handle your closing. I hope your new house is wonderful. Looks like Easter was a lot of fun there in your new home, so thanks for letting us help you out. I appreciate it. Tammy recently did a closing and purchased a new home, and thankfully she chose Foote Title Group, and I really appreciate that. So let's talk about this who needs to be a closing thing for a minute, because, you know, this can be kind of confusing sometimes. You may think you know all of those pieces, so when you originally sign the contract, whether you're on the buying side or the selling side. So let's talk about the seller side for a minute, because this is probably more common that there's some confusion about who actually needs to be a closing. And maybe you didn't know as a seller some of the pieces that maybe were involved there. Hey, Celia, how are you? Thanks so much for tuning in. Hi there, Sweet Pea. How are you? So let's talk about the seller side for a minute. So if you're the seller, and you are selling a piece of property, is everybody who has an ownership interest in that property signing off on that contract? And so let's talk about that, because that may seem kind of confusing to you, but maybe you don't realize who is actually in that ownership interest, who has an interest. So let's say, for example, that you and your husband owned a piece of property together, and let's say something happened to your husband and he's no longer with us. So you would still need to sign off on that contract, hence on that property, but we need to identify what happened to him, and we'd need some paperwork that identifies that. So whoever's doing your closing may ask you for a death certificate or some other information to qualify what happened and why he won't be signing any other documents. When someone passes away, you don't necessarily need to do a deed taking their name off the ownership, because when you sell that property, you'll just have to come up with the paperwork so we can qualify what happened and why that person won't be attending at closing and signing for their interest. Now, let's say, for example, maybe you're selling a piece of property and your spouse is in the military and they're deployed. Well, more than likely, you have a power of attorney to handle things for your personal business because of that deployment. And typically, that power of attorney will suffice for real estate. But let me qualify something about that for you that you may not understand. If you need to use a power of attorney for closing, we're going to need to hold on to that power of attorney for just a little while, because it needs to be recorded in the land records with that deed. So that may be a little uncomfortable to you, because that power of attorney may be something you use for everything you do. And so you may need to know that in advance so that you can make sure that you have a backup power of attorney. Maybe you have 2 signed, but talk to the person that's helping you prepare that power of attorney, and maybe they can give you some advice about that. Because if you're thinking about buying or selling real estate, this power of attorney question is very common and something that needs to be addressed. Hey there, Ashley. How are you this morning? Good morning, Miss Donna. Thank you, Celia. I appreciate that. So let's talk about some other things that maybe on a seller side. Maybe you bought a piece of property and you bought it with your parents and because you need them as co-signers. Well, if your parents were on that deed when you originally purchased that piece of property, they're going to need to sign off when you sign a contract to sell it and when you sign the deed transferring the ownership to the new buyer. So that is going to be something that's going to be necessary. Maybe you bought a piece of property initially with a brother or a sister or just another person, and that person is no longer in the picture anymore. Well, that person still needs to sign off on that deed. Nothing can transfer that ownership except for signing a deed. All those owners that have an ownership interest have to sign off on that deed. So, and hence they need to sign off on the real estate contract when you agree to sell that piece of property. So they should be signing off on all of that paperwork throughout the process. Hey there, Miss Paulette. How are you today? Thanks for tuning in. So, so those are some things to think about on the seller side. If you're selling a piece of property and when you originally bought it, one of the people that originally took ownership with you is now not available to sign off on the paperwork at this point, something needs to be arranged to get that taken care of. Maybe they can't be at closing, maybe they can't sign off on the real estate contract, but what can we do to facilitate that, to get that taken care of? Now, if someone needs to sign at a different location, in most cases now, because of fraud that's happened, we will have to send someone to that location, to that person, or that person will have to, if let's say you have a seller that one of them is here and another one is in Arizona, and we need to send some documentation to Arizona to have that person sign off, we'll have to arrange a spot where that person can go in and have those documents signed. It used to be we would just require that seller to go get everything signed by a notary, but unfortunately, because the fraud keeps continuing to those people that perpetrate that fraud continue to be try to find different ways to do it and outsmart us, then unfortunately what's happened is you have sellers supposedly signing documentation that really weren't the sellers. So we have to make sure that that's done correctly because we're protecting the ownership to the new purchaser. So know that you'll need a little bit of time if you're selling or buying for that matter, and one of the people that needs to sign the documentation is out of the area, then we're going to have to coordinate for them to go in to a particular spot that we designate for them to be able to sign in their area. So good morning, Ms. Carla. How are you this morning? So let's talk about on the buyer side. So again, some of these things are kind of similar, but if you're on the buying side, let's say that you're buying a house by yourself, but you need a co-signer. So maybe your parents, maybe your mom, maybe your dad, maybe your big brother, big sister, maybe one of them is going to sign off with you. They have to be at closing. And if they're not at closing, we have to figure out how to get that paperwork signed by them conveniently, but by power of attorney, or if the documents need to be sent to them, those all need to be taken care of. Let's say if you have a husband and wife, and one of the spouses, because it's very common now to be either side, doesn't work, and so their income is not being used to qualify for the loan. So they're called a non-borrowing spouse, which means they're not borrowing, they're not going on the note and a lot of the loan documentation, but they want to, because they're the spouse, of course, they want to be on the ownership of that property. So there are some documentation pieces that they need to sign at closing, and so they need to attend closing so that they can sign that paperwork. And a lot of times that's a little bit confusing and people aren't prepared for that to be expected to be taken care of. Let's see. Let's say that maybe, again, in a co-signing kind of situation, maybe there's only a couple pieces that the parents need to sign, and maybe your parents actually live in Florida and they don't have the ability to get here. So we would actually do a power of attorney. So let's talk about the power of attorney just for a second. I don't want to go too deep into this because this is something that we can go a long ways about and we could talk about in a different broadcast. But the one thing I want to say to you about a power of attorney is the power of attorney, particularly on the buyer side, is very important that the lender review and or provide you the paperwork that they need to have it done. And the reason for that is because they're loaning you the money. They have to be able to make sure that that document covers all of the bases that they need to make sure that they have the right person signing the paperwork, and the person that is giving the power of attorney is agreeing to all of the proper things to make sure that loan is secure. So a power of attorney gives you can give power to someone else to sign on your behalf. It's a document that you sign that you give someone else the power to sign on your behalf. And so there's some definite details that need to be taken care of. Again, with the possibility of such, this is another area where fraud is really common. So we want to make sure that power of attorney is done correctly and that the right people are signing all the right pieces. So the lender is going to really require some specific things on that power of attorney when you sign that, and making sure that the right one is signed. So if you're buying a piece of property and you're borrowing money to buy it, the lender is the one who's going to either provide that power of attorney or approve one that someone else has prepared for you. So before that can go any farther, that's something that needs to happen. If you're selling, typically the company that's doing the closing for you can help you prepare that power of attorney. They're definitely going to want to see it before closing to make sure that there's no, that it's not missing any pieces, that it has all the details that needs to be in there in order for you to sell that piece of property. So the closing company is going to need to know that a power of attorney is going to be used, and they're going to need to be able to see it in advance. And thirdly, they're going to need to have it at closing, the original, to make sure it's recorded in the land records so that anyone searching after that can check and see why someone didn't sign themselves on a document and how that paper trail worked. So hopefully that gave you a little bit. Usually we're going to also see the realtors at the closing. Sometimes not if something gets sidetracked or changed and they're not able to attend, but typically you're going to have your realtors are there, and then a lot of times the mortgage lender is going to attend closing too, to try to be there to answer any questions. It's not a requirement. There's really no reason they have to be there, but a lot like to attend just to help out and make sure that if there's any questions about any of the loan documents or figures, that they are able to answer those kinds of things. Typically we know enough about everything when it comes to the table that we can hopefully answer it, and if not, we can get them on the phone to make sure that that's taken care of. But sometimes, well, a lot of times, more often than not, your lenders will come to closing if they can, just to try to help out and make sure that that they're there to answer any other questions. And basically, those are all the people that should attend closing. But if you have a question about that, or the people that need to sign off on all the paperwork. But if you have any questions about that, certainly feel free to reach out to us. Any of our team members in Maryland and Virginia can help you answer any of those questions. Hey there, Jeff. How are you this morning? We also would love to be able to answer any other questions that you have. Please go to our website. You can find out all of their information there. On our website, there's lots of resources with information that explains a lot of these questions. There's a lot of resources you can download to be able to use and review. There's all kinds of checklists and flyers and guides and information that you may need. Right now, in April, we're focusing on the 10 most frequently asked questions about your home closing. That is a resource that's available on our website under the What's New feature on the front page. We have been emailing it out. It's on all of our social media. Message me if you want a copy. We'd certainly love to get that information out to you. And let me also say that in May, on May 6th, we actually have an event coming up over in King George. If you're new to the King George or Westmoreland area, we have an event that's called Make Yourself at Home. And we have all kinds of vendors that are going to be there that are service providers in the area. The police department, the health department, the fire department, the police department is actually going to be doing self-defense classes. We have the Rails to Trails. We have the Animal Rescue League. We have one of the community colleges local. We have someone from the school system that's going to be there. So lots of good information. If you're new to that area or you're thinking about moving into that area, it's a free event. It's held at the YMCA. It's from 10 to noon. There will be bites and drinks there for you. And there's also a play area for the kids, so bring your kids. They can play. You can find out about the Y, which is a great resource there in King George to that community. And the kids will be able to play while you talk to some of the different service providers we have there that's going to be able to help you out and see what kinds of things are going on in King George and Westmoreland County. So that's May 6th from 10 to noon at the YMCA in King George, and it's called Make Yourself at Home. And hopefully you guys got some good information this morning. I really appreciate your time. I look forward to talking to you at least twice a week with Coffee with Connie around 8 to 8:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Hope you guys having an awesome day. Thank you, Miss Karen Jones. How are you this morning? And if you got some good information out of what we talked about today, please hit the share button. I'd really appreciate it if you would share with your family and friends. Maybe there's some information they need that I can't get to them. So hope you guys have an awesome day. Enjoy this beautiful weather, and I'll talk to you again soon. I'm Connie Foote with Foote Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.